The night was suffocatingly quiet, broken only by the crunch of boots on damp earth and the faint rustle of leaves stirred by the restless wind. The seals had been moving cautiously, each step calculated, each breath measured, their senses sharpened by the knowledge that something wasn't right. The terrain felt alive, heavy with an unseen presence, as though the darkness itself was watching them. They had been trained to trust their instincts, and every instinct screamed danger. The silence that once served as cover now seemed like a warning, a calm before a storm they could not yet see. Weapons gripped tightly, eyes scanning every shadow, they pressed forward, yet unease clung to them like a second skin. The sudden realization came not with a sound, but with a chilling awareness that they were no longer hunters but prey. A faint glimmer of metal from a distant ridge, a flicker of movement at the edge of their vision, the subtle snap of a twig where none should be. It was enough to confirm their worst fears. They were surrounded. Invisible eyes peered at them through the cover of darkness. Rifles trained, fingers poised, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Every seal felt the shift in the air, the unspoken acknowledgement that their position was compromised, their mission jeopardized, their very lives hanging by a thread. The leader gave the hand signal to halt, and they froze, forming a defensive circle, backs against each other, trying to cover every angle. Their ears strained for clues, but the enemy was patient, disciplined, ghosts in the night who knew the land better and had the advantage of numbers. For the first time in the mission, fear began to creep into the edges of their confidence. The reality was undeniable. They had walked into a trap. The calculations raced through each mind, ammo count, escape routes, the chances of holding off what was coming. The odds were grim. A whispered curse cut through the tension, a raw acknowledgement of their plight. They had no reinforcements close by, no immediate extraction, no guarantee that help would arrive in time. Radios crackled faintly, but even communication felt like a risk with enemies lurking within firing distance. Each man knew the stakes. To fight meant certain death, to surrender meant captivity they could not afford, and to do nothing meant waiting to be cut down. The SEALs, elite as they were, understood that skill and training could only carry them so far when numbers and positioning tilted so heavily against them. Eyes darted skyward, seeking hope in the pitch-black canvas above. The clouds parted just enough to reveal a slice of moonlight, illuminating their dire position. It was then, almost collectively, that they realized their only chance. A signal, a desperate call for aid that might reach friendlies beyond the kill zone. The weight of the decision pressed hard. To fire the flare would mean exposing their location fully, stripping away the illusion of concealment, painting themselves as glowing targets against the night. Yet to hesitate meant annihilation. The choice was not between safety and danger, but between slim hope and inevitable doom. Their leader's jaw tightened, eyes reflecting the flicker of internal conflict, but his decision was swift. He gave the nod. One man pulled the flare from his pack, hands steady despite the pounding of his heart, the knowledge of dozens of enemy eyes waiting for that spark. The flare gun felt heavier than usual, as though it carried the weight of every life in the team. A deep breath, a final glance around at the faces of brothers ready to die beside him, and then the trigger was pulled. The crack of the launch shattered the silence, the streak of burning red tearing into the sky, climbing higher, higher until it bloomed above them, casting the battlefield in eerie light. Shadows scattered across the ground, revealing movement everywhere. Rifles glinting, silhouettes crouched in the treeline, enemy forces spread wide in a net meant to strangle them. The flare illuminated not just the night, but the truth of their predicament. They were hopelessly outnumbered, surrounded by an army that had been waiting patiently to spring the trap. The SEALs raised their weapons, ready for the inevitable storm of gunfire, hearts pounding in unison, the flare's glow reflecting in their determined eyes. Each second stretched into eternity as they braced for the first shot, knowing it could come from any direction. The flare had exposed their last shred of cover, yet it also carried with it a fragile thread of hope, a signal that might reach someone, somewhere, who could change the tide of this impossible night. The flare burned brightly in the night sky, casting an otherworldly glow over the battlefield. But even as the SEALs tightened their grips on their rifles, something unexpected happened. Instead of the immediate hail of gunfire they braced for, there was a pause, a hesitation in the darkness, as though the enemy had been caught off guard by the sudden burst of light. And then, cutting through the stillness, came a different sound, sharp, precise, and deadly. The crack of a rifle echoed across the valley, not wild or chaotic, but measured and deliberate. A single shot that struck with surgical accuracy. A man fell from the ridge, his weapon clattering against stone, and before the SEALs could fully register what had happened, another shot rang out, dropping another would-be attacker. The team froze, their eyes darting to the tree line, trying to identify the source. Whoever was firing wasn't with them, and yet clearly wasn't against them either. The shots were too precise, too purposeful, hitting only those who had them in their sights. 5 seconds later came a third crack, another silhouette toppling to the ground. Then a fourth, then a fifth. In the space of mere moments, the ambush that had seemed inevitable was shattered. Its executioners struck down before they could even squeeze their triggers. The unseen shooter had turned the hunters into prey, dismantling their net with terrifying efficiency. Confusion rippled through the SEAL team. None of them had expected backup, certainly not from a hidden marksman whose timing seemed almost supernatural. Yet the results were undeniable. What had been a kill box now felt disrupted, the coordination of their enemies unraveling under the pressure of unseen precision fire. The enemy fighters scrambled, their discipline breaking, the cracks in their ambush revealed by panic as one after another fell to invisible shots. Every pull of the trigger from that hidden rifle seemed to bring a surge of hope, as though fate itself had intervened. The leader signaled his men to hold their fire, to wait, to let this mysterious ally continue the work. The SEALs were trained to read situations, to exploit advantages, and now they understood that someone had decided to tilt the odds in their favor. Each man scanned the ridgelines, the shadows, anywhere a sniper might hide, but the shooter remained invisible, concealed so well that even the elite eyes of the SEALs couldn't track them. It was unnerving and awe-inspiring at once. Whoever this was, they weren't just good, they were operating at a level that even special operators recognized as extraordinary. The effect on the enemy was immediate and devastating. The initial confidence of their ambush dissolved into hesitation, some breaking cover to retreat, others firing blindly into the trees, hoping to flush out the ghost who hunted them. But blind fire was no match for precision. Each muzzle flash became a beacon, and each beacon was silenced within moments by another crack of the rifle. The SEALs, hearts still racing from the near disaster, realized that the tide had turned so drastically that the balance of power now favored them. The flare that had been meant as a desperate SOS had instead illuminated the battleground long enough for the hidden sniper to dismantle the threat before it consumed them. Questions swirled unspoken among the men. Was this an allied unit? A lone operator? Someone who had been watching them all along? The answers didn't matter now, not with survival in the balance. What mattered was that someone had taken the risk of engaging the enemy from concealment, exposing themselves with every shot, and yet doing so with flawless execution. To fire 5 shots in such quick succession, each one landing with lethal accuracy, was the work of not just skill but mastery born of years of experience. This wasn't luck. This was a hand as steady as iron, a mind calm under the weight of combat, a warrior who knew exactly what needed to be done and when to do it. As the last shot faded into the night, an eerie silence fell once more. The flare sputtered out above them, leaving the battlefield in shadows again, but everything had changed. Where there had been dozens of threats, only scattered survivors remained, their ambush broken, their will shaken. The SEALs looked to one another, breaths heavy, eyes wide, a shared realization settling in. The impossible odds they had faced had been cut down in seconds by someone they couldn't even see. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the tension of questions unasked. But one truth rang louder than all others. Someone out there had just saved them. The tension that had settled over the SEAL team was unlike anything they had faced before. The SOS flare had painted their positions in a harsh glow, and for a fleeting moment they thought it had been a mistake to use it, as though they had just handed their enemies the advantage. Yet what followed was something none of them could have anticipated. The hidden sniper who had intervened shifted the entire balance of the fight, and as the ambush fell apart, the SEALs found themselves in an unexpected silence. The stillness wasn't peace. It was the aftermath of chaos, the fragile quiet before the next storm. Every man in the squad knew the fight wasn't over, but the sudden advantage had bought them something invaluable: time. They crouched low, weapons steady, scanning the terrain for movement. The world around them was no longer just a battlefield. It was a puzzle, a series of shadows and ridgelines hiding both threats and allies. Each SEAL's mind raced with unspoken questions. Who was this shooter? Why were they here at this exact moment? Had they been tracking the enemy, or had they been tracking the SEALs themselves? These weren't thoughts they could afford to dwell on for long, but they lingered, hovering just behind the instinctive focus of combat. The human mind always searches for answers, even in the heat of survival, and the men felt the weight of mystery pressing down on them as much as the danger of the ambush itself. The SEAL commander raised a clenched fist, signaling silence, as he adjusted his position against a rocky outcrop. His eyes narrowed, studying the treeline above. Whoever was firing hadn't just been skilled, they had been impossibly precise. Every round had landed without hesitation, each one timed to strike when the enemy thought they still held control. There had been no wasted bullets, no sign of panic. That alone told the commander everything he needed to know. This wasn't just some local with a rifle. This was someone trained, someone who operated with discipline and intent. The realization rippled through him and his men, though none of them spoke it aloud. They didn't have to. A rustle in the brush snapped their focus back to the present. One of the ambushers, a survivor who hadn't fled, shifted his weapon into position, his movements clumsy under pressure. But before the SEAL closest to him could squeeze the trigger, another crack rang out. The man dropped, silenced instantly. The sound was chilling in its consistency. This phantom shooter never missed. The SEALs exchanged glances, their nerves taut. But there was also something else building within them: confidence. To fight alongside someone capable of such precision, even without knowing who they were, was to feel the kind of assurance rarely found in hostile territory. The sniper's presence was like a shield, an invisible hand guiding them away from the edge of destruction. The battlefield itself seemed to transform under this influence. Where moments ago the SEALs had been pinned, their options limited, now avenues of movement opened up. They shifted positions, advancing cautiously, no longer entirely on the defensive. The enemy's coordination was broken, their ambush scattered, and every attempt to regroup was met with another crack of the hidden rifle. It was almost surgical, the way the sniper dismantled the enemy's resolve, plucking out their confidence one shot at a time. The SEALs knew they had to use this momentum before it faded. They weren't in control of this engagement yet, but they had been given a chance, and chances like this didn't come often. As they pushed forward, the silence between shots became more noticeable. Each lull felt longer, each heartbeat a question. Was the sniper still watching? Was the ghostly ally still in position? And yet, just as doubt began to creep in, another shot would ring out, another enemy would fall, and the unspoken bond grew stronger. Without a word exchanged, the SEALs were adapting their strategy around this unseen force, aligning their movements with the rhythm of the sniper's fire. It was a strange dance, coordination without communication, trust without confirmation. The commander signaled for his men to form a tighter perimeter, scanning every angle as they advanced. He knew that relying on an unknown was dangerous, but survival demanded flexibility, and right now this unknown had turned the tide. Still, there was an unease in his chest. Whoever this was, they weren't just fighting for the SEAL's survival, they were shaping the battle itself. That kind of influence could only come from someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone with skills honed through the crucible of experience. And that begged a bigger question. What kind of warrior lurked in the shadows, deciding the fate of this firefight with the pull of a trigger? The night air grew colder, heavier, as though the land itself understood the gravity of what was unfolding. Every movement, every sound seemed amplified against the silence left by the sniper's pause between shots. The SEALs pressed onward, torn between urgency and caution. their instincts sharpened by the knowledge that they were no longer alone on this battlefield. Whoever had intervened had altered the story of this fight in ways none of them could yet understand. What they did know was that survival, once slipping from their grasp, was now back within reach, all because of a figure they had not even seen. The forest seemed to hold its breath after the last echo of gunfire faded into the night. The seals, hearts pounding and adrenaline flooding their veins, remained crouched low among the rocks and trees, their eyes darting in every direction for signs of movement. What had begun as a hopelessly stacked ambush was now a battlefield littered with silence and uncertainty. They knew the enemy was still out there, scattered, wounded, and afraid. But what unsettled them more was the presence of the unseen hand guiding the fight. The hidden sniper had proven themselves beyond question, but that very fact brought a different weight to the SEALs' minds. Someone this skilled didn't simply appear at random. The commander gave a slow hand signal, urging his men to hold positions as he scanned the ridgeline. His instincts, honed through years of operations in the world's harshest environments, told him that the shooter wasn't just covering them, they were testing them. Each shot, each carefully timed intervention had created a rhythm, almost as if the sniper was orchestrating the battle rather than merely disrupting it. That unsettled him. To control the tempo of combat like this required not just skill but mastery, and mastery implied experience. He had fought alongside some of the world's best marksmen, and this was beyond even their capabilities. The men whispered in hushed tones, fragments of disbelief passing between them. 5 shots. 5 confirmed. 1 muttered. Another shook his head, his voice trembling with both awe and unease. No misses. Who the hell does that? Their words faded as quickly as they came, because the forest demanded silence, and none of them dared to break the fragile balance more than necessary. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a branch underfoot, seemed louder in that moment, feeding the paranoia that clung to them like a second skin. From the corner of his eye, the commander spotted a faint shimmer of movement far above, near the crest of the ridge. He froze, signaling his men to stay down. The figure was too far to identify clearly, but it was enough to confirm his suspicion. The sniper wasn't vanishing into the mist. They were there, watching, deliberate in their presence. And the fact that the sniper had not yet revealed themselves fully suggested intent. This wasn't someone eager for recognition. It was someone playing the long game, someone who knew exactly what they wanted. One of the younger SEALs, his voice barely above a breath, asked the question that was weighing on all of them. Are they on our side? It was a simple query, yet it carried the gravity of life and death. The commander didn't answer, not because he didn't want to reassure his men, but because he didn't know the answer himself. Trust in war was never freely given, it was earned, paid for in actions. And while the sniper had bought them survival tonight, survival was not the same thing as loyalty. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant trickle of water down a ravine and the occasional crack of burning brush from the firefight. The SEALs began to regroup, moving cautiously, every muscle wound tight with the knowledge that the unseen ally could vanish just as suddenly as they had appeared. But just when it seemed the tension might ease, another shot rang out, startling them all. An enemy combatant, thought dead or escaped, had tried to crawl forward, a knife glinting in his hand, intent on finishing what the ambush had started. The sniper had ended it before the threat even registered fully in their minds. The commander exhaled slowly, realizing that they weren't simply being protected, they were being studied. This unseen marksman was allowing them to breathe, but not too easily. Every time the SEALs began to relax, another shot reminded them of the thin line they were walking. It was controlled by fear but also by precision. They were learning to move in sync with the sniper without even meaning to, their pace dictated by the rhythm of gunfire from above. Night deepened, wrapping the forest in its cloak of darkness, but the men no longer trusted even the shadows. They began to feel as though they were pawns in someone else's design, their survival just another piece in a larger puzzle. The commander's jaw tightened as he considered the implications. Whoever this was, they weren't just helping, they were shaping, and that meant sooner or later they would reveal their intentions. The SEALs, hardened by years of combat, could only do what they had always done: prepare for whatever came next. The team moved slowly now, the ground crunching beneath their boots as they advanced through the trees, every step deliberate and cautious. The air was thick with tension, not just from the remnants of the ambush, but from the awareness that they were not alone. Somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes were still watching them. The sniper had intervened with flawless precision, but their absence of identity gnawed at the SEALs. The line between ally and manipulator blurred with each moment that passed, and the silence of the forest pressed heavily on their nerves. The commander raised a fist to halt the team. They crouched low, listening to the distant sounds of movement. Enemy survivors repositioning, perhaps, or shadows tricking their senses. He gave a signal and 2 men flanked left, scanning the ridge. They expected another round of fire to break the silence, another crack that would eliminate the threat before it reached them. But none came. Instead, the silence stretched longer, heavier, and their nerves began to fray. The sniper, it seemed, had chosen to withhold their hand for the moment, letting the SEALs navigate the peril without guidance. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Trust was fragile, and the uncertainty of the sniper's intentions weighed heavily. The shots had been their salvation, but the lack of communication turned salvation into a question mark. Were they being tested? Was this a game of endurance to see how the SEALs would move under pressure, or was the unseen rifleman simply choosing when and how to intervene? Each possibility carried its own implications, none of which sat easily with men trained to rely on clarity and intelligence before action. A faint whistle cut through the air, a sound almost imperceptible, but enough to make the commander's head snap upward. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, coded, as though the sniper was signaling. The commander's eyes narrowed. He had heard whistles like that before in training exercises, battlefield improvisations, quick ways to communicate when radios were down. It was the mark of someone who not only understood the battlefield but had operated in environments where silence and signal were the only tools left. Whoever this was, they weren't just skilled, they were a professional. Still, the men bristled. A whistle could mean anything, a distraction, a lure, or a message only the sniper understood. Seconds later, another sound followed, the rustle of movement across the ridge. The SEALs braced, weapons up, ready for contact, but again, no gunfire came. Instead, the enemy broke cover, charging from the trees in desperation. The SEALs opened fire, their training taking over, cutting down the attackers in controlled bursts. But what shook them wasn't the ambush itself. It was that none of the enemies got close enough to land a shot. Their approach had been reckless, as though they were already broken by fear of something greater than the SEALs themselves. The commander pieced it together. The sniper wasn't simply shooting to kill. They were manipulating the enemy's morale, breaking their confidence one calculated shot at a time until even the survivors moved like cornered animals. The SEALs weren't fighting an organized enemy anymore. They were fighting ghosts of men already crushed by the invisible predator in the hills. That realization sent a chill down their spines. The sniper had turned the entire battlefield into a psychological weapon, and both sides, enemy and ally alike, were caught in its grip. The men moved forward again, their breaths visible in the cold night air, rifles raised but fingers tighter than before. Fear of the unseen wasn't foreign to them. They had faced it countless times, but never had it been so effective, so perfectly calculated. Every step forward now felt less like advancing against the enemy and more like stepping deeper into someone else's design. They weren't dictating the fight anymore. They were reacting, adjusting to a rhythm they hadn't set. The commander clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to call out, to demand the sniper reveal themselves. But instinct told him that was what the sniper wanted, to remain in control, to let them wonder, to keep them tethered to the invisible thread of uncertainty. Instead, he signaled his men to tighten formation, to move as one. The SEALs were trained to adapt, and if they were pawns on this chessboard, they would become the kind that refused to fall easily. Still, even as they advanced, their eyes flicked to the ridges, to the shadows, to every place a barrel might be aimed, and the thought pressed on them all. Whoever this was, they weren't finished yet. The flare's smoke still lingered faintly in the night sky, a reminder of how close the team had come to being overrun. The forest was quieter now, the sharp echo of gunfire replaced with the low crackle of branches under cautious boots. Each man knew that though the ambush had been broken, the mission was far from over. Survival was never guaranteed, not even for a SEAL unit as disciplined and battle-hardened as this one. The sudden intervention of the sniper had turned certain defeat into survival, but the aftermath brought with it new questions, new dangers, and a sense that they were walking on the edge of a knife. The commander ordered the men to take cover and regroup, their breaths heavy, their eyes scanning every shadow. Adrenaline was still surging through their veins, but beneath it was exhaustion, the kind that weighed on the body after hours of tension and combat. They crouched low, weapons steady, but every small sound, the crack of a twig, the shifting of leaves, sent their nerves spiking again. The mind in such moments became its own battlefield, waging war between instinct and reason. They could not afford hesitation, but neither could they afford to act recklessly. The silence that followed the sniper's last shot gnawed at them. The forest seemed alive, whispering secrets they could not hear, and every man wondered the same thing. Had the threat truly ended, or had it merely changed shape? The survivors of the ambush could still be out there, regrouping, planning another strike. The sniper could have shifted positions, preparing to watch them as much as watch the enemy. The uncertainty kept them sharp, but it also drained them, leaving their thoughts heavy with suspicion. The commander's voice broke through, calm but firm, reminding them of their objective. They had to move, to press forward, because stagnation was as dangerous as walking blind into another fight. The forest could not be trusted, and neither could the silence. He directed 2 men to sweep ahead, while the others covered the rear. The formation tightened, every angle watched, every rifle raised just a little higher than before. Survival in such conditions was never just about strength or skill. It was about discipline, about trusting the system drilled into them until it became second nature. As they pushed forward, the terrain shifted into uneven ground, forcing them to move slower. It was here that the weight of survival pressed hardest. Every muscle ached. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the forest itself. Men trained for war still felt the raw edge of fear when walking blind, but fear, when controlled, became fuel. It kept their senses sharp, their movements precise, their eyes always searching. Each man knew that slipping into complacency for even a moment could mean a bullet from an unseen direction. But survival wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The commander understood this better than anyone. He spoke sparingly, but when he did, his words carried weight, anchoring the men to focus. He reminded them of past missions, of hardships survived, of victories earned under worse conditions. The team drew strength from those reminders, not because they erased the fear, but because they reminded them of who they were. SEALs were bred not only to endure but to outlast, to outthink, to adapt until survival became inevitable. The forest opened into a clearing, moonlight cutting sharp silver lines across the ground. It should have felt like relief to escape the trees, but instead, it brought vulnerability. The open space offered no cover, no concealment, and every man knew they were exposed. They moved cautiously, in low stances, rifles sweeping the horizon. The sniper's absence weighed heavily here. If the enemy still lingered, if another ambush was waiting, they would be nothing more than silhouettes against the pale glow of the night sky. Still, they advanced step by step, discipline holding them together like steel. Survival demanded movement, no matter the risk. The commander signaled the men to cross in intervals, breaking the team into smaller elements, ensuring that if one came under fire, the others could counter. It was a small detail, a tactical choice, but it was the kind of detail that spelled the difference between living and dying. The clearing gave way once more to thick woods, and the sense of safety grew only marginally. The SEALs had survived the flare, the ambush, and the uncertainty of the sniper's intervention, but the night stretched long before them. Their survival would not be determined by luck or a single moment of intervention. It would be carved from discipline, unity, and the unyielding determination to keep moving forward despite the unknown pressing at every side. Each man carried that weight in silence, their resolve as sharp as the steel they gripped, their survival as fragile and as fierce as the night itself.